Hello and welcome to the last session on diuretics. So, in then we will be discussing about osmotic diuretics, then potassium sparing diuretics, that is the aldosterone antagonist and epithelial sodium channel blockers, and lastly we will also discuss about antidiuretic hormones or antidiuretic drugs. Okay. So to start with, let us discuss osmotic diuretics. What are these? Actually, these are nothing but pharmacologically inert substance. So, what are the characteristics of ideal osmotic diuretic? That is, it has to be pharmacologically inert substance. Okay, it should not have any active compound, or it should not produce any action in the nephron. Okay, so it should be pharmacologically inert substance which are freely filtered. So this is again a criteria of ideal osmotic diuretic, that it should be freely filtered through the kidney or through the glomerulus, and it should not be reabsorbed. So among the mentioned osmotic diuretics, those are mannitol, glycerol and urea. Ideal osmotic diuretic is mannitol. Why? Because in glycerol it gets metabolized to glucose, so again it is not fitting into that criteria, and urea is partially reabsorbed in the nephron, so again it is not fitting that criteria. So what will be the mechanism of action of osmotic diuretics? Actually they cause movement of water from the cells into the extracellular fluid, okay, into the extracellular space. So they just act like a sponge. They just suck out the fluid from the intracellular space to the extracellular space, so thereby leading to expansion of intravascular fluid, and again this will cause reduction in blood viscosity. So what is happening, there is actually shift of water from the intracellular space to the extracellular space. So that is, they are osmotically active. So what can be the uses? Basically they are used in the treatment of glaucoma. Actually, they rapidly reduce this intraocular pressure in glaucoma. So, especially in acute congestive glaucoma, these diuretic finds its use, and also they decreases IOT, that is intraocular. This intracranial pressure or intracranial tension. ICT is also decreased by the osmotic diuretics. So that can be, due to this, these group of drugs can be used in patients who are having brain injury. Okay, so to rapidly reduce the intracellular pressure. Also, as they cause diuresis, actually they more or less cause aquaresis, means water excretion is more than the electrolyte excretion. So so to dilute the urine in case of rhabdomyolysis, osmotic diuretics can be used. So these are the important indications of osmotic diuretics. Regarding their adverse effects, so as they cause volume contraction, so they can lead to acute hypovolemia, and also they are actually contraindicated in pulmonary edema and cerebral hemorrhage. Why? Because especially in cerebral hemorrhage, what happens, they leak out from the blood vessels, and then they cause osmotic effects leading to increased intracranial tension. So ICT is increased in case of cerebral hemorrhage, so they are not used in cerebral hemorrhage, okay, because the blood vessels are very leaky. And in this pulmonary edema and heart failure, they cause, again they increase this ECF fluid, due to which there can be volume overload, and that can aggravate either heart failure or pulmonary edema. Now coming to potassium sparing diuretics. The diuretics which we have studied till now, all of them used to cause hypokalemia because they were acting proximal to the site of action of aldosterone. Okay. So now we will be discussing about potassium sparing diuretics. So the common adverse effect of all of these agents will be hyperkalemia. They can precipitate hyperkalemia. So they come in two flavors. One is aldosterone receptor antagonist, that is the spironolactone and eplerenone, and the second type of potassium sparing diuretic is epithelial sodium channel blockers. Those are amiloride and triamterene. So now coming to aldosterone receptor antagonist, again it is of two types. One is spironolactone and eplerenone. So what can be the use of these agents? The number one use is that it can be used in hyperaldosteronic state. So we know that hyperaldosteronism is of two types. One is primary hyperaldosteronism, that also called as Cone syndrome, and another type is secondary hyperaldosteronism, where there is increased levels of aldosterone or increased secretion of aldosterone in response to volume contraction. Like if the patient is having cirrhosis, nephrotic syndrome, or this congestive heart failure, there is increased activation of RAS, that is renin angiotensin aldosterone system, due to which there is increased release of aldosterone. So in those states, that is in both primary and secondary hyperaldosteronism, we can use potassium sparing diuretics like spironolactone. Also, especially this spironolactone has anti-androgenic effect. Okay, it has anti-androgenic effect. So that is why, due to this, it has means it can be used in this PCOS, that is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and in female hirsutism. Then one important use of potassium sparing diuretics is as a adjunct, that is in combination with potassium wasting diuretics like furosemide or thiazides. There also we can combine these agents to decrease hypokalemia, to decrease the incidence of hypokalemia. Now coming to this use of aldosterone antagonist in congestive heart failure. So spironolactone is said to prolong survival in case of myocardial, this in heart failure, in congestive heart failure. Actually what happens, due to aldosterone there is cardiac remodeling. So any drug that will prevent the action of aldosterone will be helpful in prolonging the survival or life in congestive heart failure. So this is important characteristic of spironolactone. And lastly, the adverse effects, we can easily derive the adverse effect. Most common adverse effect will be hyperkalemia, and here there is no exception. Hyperkalemia is going hand in hand with acidosis. So there can be acidosis and hyperkalemia, and especially this spironolactone is associated with anti-androgenic side effects like gynecomastia. Okay, so these can be more commonly seen with spironolactone as compared to eplerenone. Remember, eplerenone is a drug which is not associated with anti-androgenic adverse effects. Okay. Regarding now coming to epithelial sodium channel blockers, we have two drugs, amiloride and triamterene, and again the use is more or less similar to that of aldosterone receptor blockers, like they are combined with potassium wasting diuretics, so they can be used in combination with those drugs. And we already know that these are the drug of choice. Amiloride especially is a drug of choice in lithium induced nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Usually in diabetes insipidus we give thiazides, but in case of in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus we give thiazide, but in case of lithium induced nephrogenic diabetes insipidus the drug of choice is amiloride, and we have discussed this in the classes before. And again the side effects will be more or less similar to that of this aldosterone receptor blockers, that is hyperkalemia and acidosis, and it is not associated with again any anti-androgenic effects. So let us see the mechanism of action again in detail of potassium sparing diuretics. So what is the site of action? We already know the site of action of potassium sparing diuretics is in collecting duct, especially in principal cell. Okay, so again this on left hand side there is luminal membrane, and on right hand side we have basolateral membrane. This contains blood, while luminal membrane side contains urine. So let us orient ourselves to these channels. What are these? So we can see epithelial sodium channels in the luminal side. Okay, and we can also see one antiport, that is sodium potassium or sodium hydrogen antiport, which is controlled by, this is controlled by the aldosterone. Okay, and aldosterone will bind to its receptor, that is aldosterone receptor, which is present at the basolateral site, and here it through gene transcription it will cause increased synthesis, or yeah, increased synthesis of this channel especially, leading to increased sodium reabsorption and secretion of potassium and hydrogen. So due to the effect of aldosterone, there will be increased reabsorption of sodium and excretion of potassium and hydrogen. So again, if we block this, the activity of this sodium potassium hydrogen antiporter by giving a aldosterone receptor blocker, we can cause increased release of potassium and hydrogen. Sorry, we will block this. We will block the action of this antiporter by giving aldosterone receptor blockers like spironolactone and eplerenone. Just remember, they are blocking this receptor which is present at the basolateral site. So they are acting through the basolateral site. So by doing this, the activity or the function of this antiport is being inhibited. So which will lead to increased excretion of sodium, thereby producing its weak diuretic effect. Sodium excretion is less than 5% here. So it will produce weak diuretic effect, while potassium and hydrogen will be reabsorbed. So due to this, there will be hyperkalemia and acidosis. Again, same will be true for amiloride, which will be blocking this sodium epithelial sodium channels, thereby again leading to same effect, that is diuresis and hyperkalemia along with acidosis. One more thing, that we know that through this epithelial sodium channel, one important drug is reabsorbed, that is lithium. So for the treatment, for increasing the lithium clearance, we can give epithelial sodium channel blockers. That is why they are the drug of choice in case of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus due to lithium. Also we can see this is the intercalated cell, which is again present in collecting duct. Here we can see the role of carbonic anhydrase enzyme, and we just recall one important adverse effect of carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, those that was this metabolic acidosis, and that can be again explained how that can be produced. That can be explained here also, that by inhibiting this carbonic anhydrase in collecting duct, it is causing decreased secretion of hydrogen ion, again leading to more reabsorption of hydrogen ion, and again leading to metabolic acidosis. So apart from the primary action of carbonic anhydrase inhibitors in PCT, we can see that carbonic anhydrase inhibitors can inhibit this enzyme in collecting duct also, thereby leading to metabolic acidosis. So now this finishes the drugs acting in the collecting duct. Now coming to antidiuretic drugs. So this is the opposite of diuretics, that is, it will reduce the formation of urine, it will reduce the urine volume without affecting salt excretion. So there won't be any effect on sodium levels. Okay, so they are of again three types. One is ADH and their analogs, that is antidiuretic hormone and its analog like desmopressin and terlipressin. Next is amiloride and thiazides. They are having paradoxical effects, especially in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. And lastly, we have carbamazepine and chloropropamide. They also cause They also have some, they increase actually the levels of antidiuretic hormone, leading to antidiuretic effect. So now coming to ADH and its analogs. So ADH basically binds to three types of receptors. V1, and in V1 it is of two types, V1A and V1B, and V2 receptors. Okay, so vasopressin has both antidiuretic and vasopressor effect. Why? Because it will bind to both types of receptor, V1 and V2. So by binding to V2, it produces its antidiuretic effect. That is, in diabetes insipidus we can use vasopressin, especially in which type? That is in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Sorry, in central diabetes insipidus, because in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus it is already resistant to the effect of antidiuretic hormone. So vasopressin can only be used in central type of diabetes insipidus where there is deficiency of ADH. Also in case of nocturesis we can use vasopressin. The route of administration can be intranasal also. And in hemophilia, because it is associated with increase in factor 8 and von Willebrand factor. So in case of hemophilia and von Willebrand disease we can use ADH analogs. Now the actions or the uses based on V1 action. Basically due to this stimulation of V1 receptors there is vasoconstriction. So this principle can be used in conditions where there is bleeding, excessive bleeding, especially in bleeding varices associated with cirrhosis. So this terlipressin is used there. Again, analog of ADH which has more action on B1 receptor. Again, coming to the adverse effect, the important adverse effect will be because of retention of water. There can be water intoxication which can lead to hyponatremia. Now coming to one interesting drug, that is V2 antagonist. V2 receptor antagonists like tolvaptan, conivaptan and mozavaptan. So where we can use these agents? Actually in a condition where there is too much secretion of antidiuretic hormone, and that disease is called as syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone, SIADH. Here there is too much release of antidiuretic hormone. So here we can use ADH antagonist, you can say, or V2 receptor antagonist like tolvaptan and conivaptan. And again, in certain conditions like cirrhosis, there is hyponatremia due to too much release of ADH. There also we can use this vasopressin antagonist. Again, the adverse effect we can predict, there can be dry mouth and thirst. So this finishes the whole of this marathon of diuretics. Okay, so in this chart I have just summarized the important diuretics and their mechanism of action with important status of urinary electrolytes, like in which condition it is, in which drug it is increased or decreased, and lastly the effect on pH, on blood pH. So let us revise something, that is, in case of acetazolamide we can see there is acidosis, the metabolic acidosis we can see because of bicarbonate urea. So in urine bicarbonate level will be increased. Okay, so urinary pH will be increased while blood pH will be reduced. And the site of action we can easily recall that it is in PCT, where it is inhibiting the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. In case of loop diuretics, we can again see they are inhibiting that co-transporter, that is sodium potassium 2 chloride in thick ascending loop of Henle, leading to again increased excretion of sodium. Calcium is also being in calcium excretion is also being increased along with magnesium excretion, leading to hypocalcemia and hypomagnesemia. And as this loop diuretics is acting proximal to the site of action of aldosterone, it will be associated with alkalosis. Okay, and here we can see these are the thiazide group of diuretics, and we can see the site of action, that is in DCT, and it is inhibiting sodium chloride sympod. One important finding here is that it is causing decreased excretion of calcium, leading to hypercalcemia, while furosemide is leading to hypocalcemia. And lastly, we have these group of drugs, that is potassium sparing diuretics. Those are acting in collecting duct. Spironolactone and eplerenone is blocking this aldosterone receptor, while amiloride and triamterene is blocking epithelial sodium channels. They are again leading to hyperkalemia and metabolic acidosis. So just a trick that in PCT and in the last site of this nephron, these drugs are causing acidosis, while the drugs acting in the middle path are causing middle portion of nephron is causing alkalosis. So this is just a important hint through which you can decide whether the drug is causing alkalosis or acidosis. But better to remember the mechanism of action and through that you can derive the adverse effects. So this concludes the chapter on diuretics. Thank you.